Hi, welcome back to Inside the History Preserving the Fleet here at Battleship Cove. I'm Tom Lowney, GM1, Gunner's Mate First Class Retired. I'm here to show you a little about projectiles and ammunition and different types. We're just going to cover a few basic things and not get into too much detail so you have a better familiarization and understanding about Navy gun ammunition. Right here is the ordnance display down in the berthing apartment just next to turret 3. We set up the display with different types of projectiles and ammunition color-coded so that way you can see what a sailor has to deal with different types of ammunition. These are all inert ammunition, by the way. They're not brightly stenciled, so it adds to the display so we wouldn't have obnoxious stencils and so forth that would take away from the actual viewing of these projectiles. So what we have here set up is a wide variety of what was on board Battleship Massachusetts, as well as a few other gun systems that Massachusetts didn't have. So when you look at gun ammunition, you have three basic types. You have fixed ammunition, you have semi-fixed, and bag ammunition for guns. All right. Now the Battleship Massachusetts has 16-inch guns, 16-inch 45 Mark 6. That's this projectile right here. This is painted up as an armor piercing with a shield on it. All right. Now that is a bag style gun. All right. The powder bags here, as you can see, take 6 of these powder bags. These powder bags for the 16-inch 45, about 100 pounds. Now these are trainers that were left on board and are painted up for sole purpose for training, not live ammunition. Now, if it was, you'd have a red ignition pad here, which would be for your ignition pad, which would be black powder. And then the rest would be nitrocellulite, and they'd be granules about an inch wide, circular, with holes through them so they could burn evenly. All right, and those would be stacked inside here instead of a jumbled. There's different types of bag. Bags could be just by weight, by jumbled, or a uniform stack. So that way they're easy to handle and maneuver and will burn evenly. Because a 16-inch powder bag, due to most people's thought, is when you pull a trigger, it doesn't explode when it fires. It's a controlled even burn. It's done in milliseconds. What happens is the ignition pad, being black powder, burns evenly all the way across in a second, flash. And what it does, it starts the ignition and the burning all the way through so that the grains will burn completely and evenly, creating the gas that builds up as it burns, which finally pushes out and propels the projectile. Because there's 6 bags to fire this 1-ton projectile out the muzzle. Now, as it burns, it slowly burns to the next one, hits the next bag, which strikes the ignition pad. That's why the ignition pads always have to face to the back. So when the initial burst and flame comes to it, it starts to burn, flashes across evenly, and burns the bag completely. So you have a complete, steady burning process. It's only a few milliseconds, but it's out the barrel. Because when you listen and see in the videos of the big guns firing, it's a loud boom. What you're hearing is the burning and the gas is building up, pushing out the projectile, brings it up to a muzzle velocity of over 2,000 feet per second. Out the barrel it goes to its target. So it takes 6 of these 100-pound bags to get this out. And 10 pounds of white phosphorus, the rest is, not white phosphorus, excuse me. Black powder, the rest of it is nitrocellulite, the granules that are stacked in there. That burns right through. All right, so when you look at a 16-inch projectile here, this top cone part is the windshield. This protects the armored part of the projectile. Then when you look at an armor-piercing projectile, I'll show you one back here. It's similar to this big puppy. All right, this is an 8-inch. There's no windshield on it. It's missing. It's been taken off. But this projectile, its body is blunt. When it fires, you want a windshield to help with the aerodynamic and the spin of it. Because when you stop firing a blunted projectile, it's fighting the aerodynamics to spin and to go straight. So the windshield is used to help the projectile in flight, and it also has another purpose. Now we've taken one of the windshields that was cut off an armor-piercing projectile, and it was cut open. This was cut open so you could see inside. Now the color coding is set up. Yellow is usually signifying a high explosive, either TNT or a different type of high explosive contained in the body. But the windshield also serves to hold a dye marker. Now if you notice, there's bands here, different colors. Now the yellow being the high explosives, telling you the type, the white band is indicating it's, I'm trying to remember, the white band for armor piercing, not armor piercing, the black is for the armor piercing. The green here signifies what ship it is. In the South Dakota-class, green would indicate ammunition for the USS Massachusetts. If it was red, it would be for South Dakota. If there was no color band, it would be the Alabama, if I remember right. And the Iowas, it's different. The Iowas green would be for the USS Wisconsin, and red would be for the New Jersey. Now, why would you have the color coding for that and a dye marker in here? The dye marker is in a big paper bag inside of this. This would be one piece and screwed on and then tack welded to the projectile before the ordnance was, the explosive was put in. The color is there so when you're firing it in conjunction with other battleships in a battle line, when you fire your projectile and hits the target or gets next to it, what happens is this shield would disintegrate, shatter, and the dye would either mix with water or be splattered all over the target. When you have other ships shooting with you, how do you tell whose shot is whose when you're doing range finding to see where you're hitting? That's where these colored dye markers come into place. So if Massachusetts and Wisconsin would be shooting together, you would try not to shoot at the same target so that way you would not confuse your firing procedures and get the wrong information to the fire controlman. And that way if you were in with the other South Dakotas, you could tell whose shots were whose, and that way if you're on target or off, how far you have to adjust your firing solution. So that's why the color bands are on there in this particular case of the armor piercing. If it had white with red dots, it would be a tracer. And you see one over here that indicates that, the white with the red dot, that would be a tracer. Now, with the windshield set up in the dye marker for the armor piercing, when you go down further, you'll see on the 16-inch here, painted up, that this silver band here would actually be steel. Now this is the ogive, this is the barlet, and the ogive here. That's part of the projectile. It's broken down into segments. The ogive here is the widest point. It is actually the actual most diameter of the 16-inch projectile. So 16-inch. This is what rides on the rifling. So that way the projectile is balanced. When it goes in, if you would look on the bottom here, you see the gold band. I'll show you on a regular projectile. I'll take the star shell here and try to show you that. Now this is painted up as a star shell. Okay, it's an illumination round. It fires out and it detonates out in the air behind the target with a parachuted flare, drop and illuminate. So the silhouette of the target or ship, whatever, you would use this for night shooting and be able to tell distance, range, and what the target actually is. All right, so this star shell, we're going to tell you basically, this is the ogive, the upper part that cones up and in. All right, the barlet is the widest part of the projectile. This is what rides on the rifling inside. This is the actual diameter. Now the rotating band just below the body, which contains your explosives, this rotating band is brass setup. So that way it can be cut. So when rifling engages, it cuts into this ring. And the rifling gives it a spin. So it's just like a football player. When he throws his football, he's got the threads, he wants to spin it. The rifling cuts into, and it's able to give it the spin it needs. So that way, as it's flying, the more spin, the better the accuracy, the longer the range. So that's a little bit wider, so that way the rifling can cut into it. Then there's the base. Right? That's a basic projectile. Now this one's painted up, as you can see, blue, white stripe, star. Star shell is nicknamed. It's an illumination. It carries a parachute, drops behind, silhouettes a target. That way you can see it clearly, and you can use your optics to fire, not just radar. So this being a star shell, and a basic information about how a projectile is set up. Okay. Now you also have on high capacity projectiles, which can be used for either shore bombardment, surface targets. Then you have anti-aircraft, AA common. Okay, and they have a thin wall projectile, so they hold a higher explosive charge. Armor piercing, believe it or not, there's only 26 pounds of explosives in here compared to the whole 1-ton projectile. The body is shattering. It's like a firecracker in your hand. You get more compression around it, bigger the yield when it detonates and pushes out. It causes this to be shrapnel. The idea is that it bursts through the armor and detonates behind it. So when you see an armor piercing, you won't see a fuse on it. What it has is a base fuse. You have either a mechanical, like you see here. Okay, that's either a point det, variable timing. You have different fuses for different jobs. If you wanted to do an air burst, you'd have a mechanical timing this preset. You'd have a variable timing. It could be set, and you have one that has radar. Basically, it's a radio wave that bounces back, and when it gets close enough to a target, it tells the projectile to detonate. These were considered secret projectiles back in the day in World War II. You couldn't shoot them at over land targets because they were afraid that either the Axis powers would get a hold of them and invent their own version of it. And the VT was a very secret projectile, but very highly effective. It revolutionized anti-aircraft fire, but that's another story all on its own. So for your high capacity projectiles, you'd have a thin wall to pack in more ordnance, more high explosives. So that way you could use it for light armor, anti-personnel ordnance. It's war. You're trying to cause as much damage as you can for the least amount of effort. That's why the high capacities in anti-aircraft were set up. You'd have a fuse here and a base fuse. So if this fuse was damaged or didn't operate, when it struck a target, there'd be a weight inside of the base of the fuse. So as it hits, your centrifugal force is going to cause an impact on the inside the base that would detonate the explosive, so you wouldn't have a dud effect if the nose fuse didn't work. So you usually had a nose fuse, but armor piercing usually had a base fuse because you're hitting blunt steel, concrete, or whatever, and you want to penetrate. So a base fuse would normally be for an armor piercing. But your high capacities would be depending on what your job was. If it's aircraft, AA common, you wanted to have a high yield, so you'd have a variable time fuse set for a certain altitude, or the VT, which would have the radio frequency and trigger the explosives, so that way you could have a burst charge in the air, sending out small pieces of shrapnel to take out. So when you see in old war movies, you see the flak going off. Well, those are usually, the Germans and the Japanese had predetermined set fuses that would go off at certain altitudes, and the flak would be as the charge went off, the shrapnel went everywhere in a diameter, depending on the size of the projectile and the shape, would give you your blast radius and coverage. So that's why you see the black smokes when you see these war movies around the planes. That was literally death in the air for them. That was putting up a wall of steel. Now, that would be your projectile. Okay, we've covered the bag. Now we're going to get into semi-fixed. Now, semi-fixed, you'd have your projectile, say the 5-inch, and then you would have, nice, good thing these are only 30 pounds. This is a semi-fixed because your powder is contained in a cylinder, and then your projectile will be on top. Semi-fixed ammunition. It makes it easier and faster for loading compared to the bag. The 5-inch, you could fire 22 rounds a minute on average, which is what they designed. Good luck on reaching that. You got to get a good crew for that. And your propellant would be in here, and you'd have a fuse that comes through the, there'd be a firing tube in the middle with holes. That way when it did fire, it would burn through and ignite the whole burst, because you're shooting through a rifle projectile. Again, control, burn, even, get the pressure behind it and launch the projectile. So that would be semi-fixed. Now, for the last one would be a fixed round. And that would be this one here. This is an all-up round projectile pressed into a body. Again, this is a trainer, but to give you the idea, this would be the projectile, this would be the propellant with the warhead here, primer there, canister here containing the propellant. All up round, fixed. All right? And this would be for your light anti-aircraft guns, usually 3-inch and below, 20 millimeter, 40 millimeter. So that way you could fire them faster. You wouldn't have to worry about keeping them separate. With bag and semi-fixed, you would store them separately because of the mass of explosive weight. You wouldn't want to concentrate that mixed together, because they require different handling procedures and storage procedures because of either temperature or exposure. So, but small arms ammunition is usually a smaller explosive weight in general, so that's why it's more acceptable to be a fixed round. And this one back here, if you're wondering, that's an 8-inch 55 for the Salem, USS Salem, her gun system on board. And that would be her project. We put that in here just so you can kind of get an idea of the different various sizes and types of ammunition there are, and the color codings. So, all right, we were talking about fuses on board, and this here is a nice little fuse setup. Okay, this one is for training purposes. This would be in your high capacity projectiles, usually for shore bombardment or ship to ship, and high explosive, high capacity. It screws in. This is pretty much a dummy setup, but you would have your mechanics inside the body, and your explosives, once it mechanically triggers into the body, would be through this end of it. This is just a blind plug fuse for a 16-inch high capacity, not an armor piercing. Again, the armor piercing would be in the base. High capacity usually be inside here, so you could mechanically set it for either air burst or direct contact, delay. There's all different types of settings you can, different types. So that's basically a 16-inch high capacity fuse setup. That's basically your basics and fundamentals ammunition here we have on display at Battleship Cove. Hope you enjoyed. If you want to look for more information, feel free to browse, look around the ship, and get information online for it. This is just the basic fundamentals. Thank you for your time. Again, share, like, and subscribe. For more information, see the links that we have associated with this. Hope you enjoyed. Again, my name is Tom Lowney, Battleship Cove. Thank you very much. Have a good day.